The knock came at exactly 12:03 a.m., sharp, deliberate, and heavy enough to make my chest tighten before my mind could catch up. I hadn't been expecting anyone, not at that hour. Not after the kind of silence I had wrapped around my life for the past 7 months. I stood frozen in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the door like it had suddenly become something alive, something dangerous. Because deep down, without even opening it, I already knew who it was. Before we go further, if you enjoy emotional, real, life-inspired stories like this, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories Beyond the Porch. Your support keeps these stories alive. 7 months earlier, I had made a decision that felt right at the time, but slowly turned into a weight I carried everywhere. I had stopped responding to her calls, ignored her messages, avoided every possible encounter. She was my boss, yes, but she had become something more complicated than that. Not in the way people usually assume. It wasn't romance, not really. It was something deeper, something messier. She believed in me when I had nothing left to believe in myself. And somehow, that made everything harder. I remember the last day I saw her at the office. The way the late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, painting long shadows across her desk. She had called me in, her voice calm but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. There was concern in her eyes, the kind that doesn't come from authority, but from something painfully human. She had noticed I was slipping, missing deadlines, losing focus, drifting. She offered help, real help, not the corporate kind that comes with conditions. But instead of accepting it, I shut down. Something inside me refused to be seen that clearly, so I left. Not just the job, but everything connected to it. I changed my number, moved apartments, built a quiet life where no one asked questions and no one expected answers. I told myself it was peace. In reality, it was escape. And now, 7 months later, she was standing outside my door. The second knock came, softer this time, but somehow heavier. I walked toward the door slowly, each step dragging the past back into the present. My hand hovered over the handle longer than it should have. When I finally opened it, the world seemed to narrow into a single moment. She looked different, not drastically, but enough. Her hair was slightly longer, her face more tired. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. But what struck me most wasn't how she looked. It was how she felt, like someone carrying something too heavy for too long. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick and fragile. Then I noticed her hands. She was holding something. A small, worn envelope, edges bent, like it had been opened and closed too many times. I stepped aside, wordlessly letting her in. The apartment felt smaller with her inside it, like it couldn't contain everything that had been left unsaid between us. She stood near the door at first, as if unsure whether she truly belonged there, and maybe she didn't. Not anymore. I tried to find the right words, but nothing came. All I could feel was the weight of those 7 months pressing down on both of us. Finally, she extended the envelope toward me. I took it without asking questions, because something in her expression told me the answers were already inside. My hands felt heavier than they should have as I opened it. Inside was a photograph. At first glance, it didn't make sense. It was old, slightly faded, a hospital room, a man lying on a bed, frail but smiling, and standing beside him was me. My breath caught. I had no memory of it. I looked up at her, confusion mixing with something deeper, something more unsettling. That's when everything began to unravel. She slowly sat down, like the strength was leaving her piece by piece. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about work. It never had been. The man in the photo was her father, 7 months ago. The same time I disappeared, he had been dying. What I didn't know, what she had tried to tell me that day in her office, was that I had met him once before. During a company volunteer program I barely remembered attending. I had spent an afternoon talking to him, keeping him company when no one else could. It had been a small, forgettable act for me, but for him, and for her, it meant everything. He had talked about that day until the very end. And in his final moments, he had asked for me, but I was gone. I had ignored every call, every message, every chance to show up. The silence I had built around myself had reached further than I ever imagined. Her voice, when she finally spoke, wasn't angry. That would have been easier to handle. It was something far worse, quiet, tired, and filled with a kind of hurt that didn't need volume to be heard. She hadn't come to blame me. She had come because she didn't know how to let go of something unfinished. And somehow, neither did I. That night stretched into hours, not filled with dramatic revelations or loud emotions, but with something much more real, honesty, the kind that hurts before it heals. We talked about things we had both avoided, about fear, about running away, about the strange ways people impact each other without even realizing it. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not suddenly, not completely, but enough. In the days that followed, I started to rebuild pieces of my life I had abandoned. Slowly, carefully, I reached out to people I had pushed away, faced things I had been avoiding. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. And she started to heal too, not because of me, but alongside me. We never returned to what we were before. Some things aren't meant to go back, but we found something new, something quieter, stronger, and more honest. That midnight knock didn't just bring her back into my life. It brought me back into my own. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Stories Beyond the Porch for more stories that stay with you long after they end. And before you go, I have one small request. Comment below with the word "I'll show up." Not for anyone else, but for yourself. Because sometimes the hardest door to knock on is your own.